Looks like we are live. Are we live? Are we live? Check everything. Probably would have been wise to do this before we started. All the cameras seem to be on. This camera's on. That's the main one because that's the one you can see me on. Okay, good. Right. So what are we working on today, everybody? I've got a new picture, something very different for me. And we're looking at that in a minute. But how have you been? It's a sunny day here in Essex, which makes a change. But not only is it sunny, it's warm, which is lovely. But we're in an old building here, our office, and my studio is on the ground floor of the office. And it's surprisingly cool in here because it's an old building. It's got very thick walls, so it keeps it quite cool. I almost put the heating on, but decided not to. Anyway, so what are we looking at? Well, if I change over to... In fact, I'm going to click over to that camera. Has that worked? Yeah, I believe it has. So this is the reference photo I'm going to be painting from. Now, I have added this photo to the Patreon post with the announcement post. So if you want to paint along with me, feel free to do so. That image is attached. Might be a bit late to be telling you that now, but hopefully some of you have already noticed. So basically, one of the things I want to do today is go over the process of blocking in. I've touched on this in a few different YouTube videos, but actually there is a process that I use to block in, and it's an important part of the painting, certainly in the method that I use with the block in and then layering up from there. It is an important part, something I've not gone into that much because actually it doesn't make a great sort of entertaining video, but I think it is very good, certainly if you're painting my technique. A lot of people will put on they won't block in. So they'll use like a base coat, which quite often tends to be something like a burnt umber or a raw umber or something like that. Now that's a very old technique. Many masters use the same thing, and I think that has benefits because when you're just painting on white, especially when you start to introduce detail and more colors and things, when you're just painting on white, you've got no frame of reference, and it's difficult to get those colors right. But if you've got some sort of background like that burnt sienna or burnt umber, it makes it a little bit easier. But one of the problems with that is it kind of deadens the painting. You've probably heard me say in the past that I tend not to paint. I do paint light over dark, but I try and limit it as much as possible. I think it's important to use this white. I think it's important to be able to see some of this white through your painting, and that gives you much more depth in your painting. It allows the colors to be more vibrant, whereas if you're always painting on something a little bit darker, it just kills it slightly. Also, if you're using a sort of a warm color like a brown, it tends to adjust the color of the painting a little bit. So I personally would never do that. It's not something I would do. This method is much quicker because, in my opinion, okay, you have the white, the color matching might be a little bit difficult for the block in, but once you've got that block in on your panel, it's then much easier to color match from there onwards. Whereas if you do the overall sort of a bed of brown, then you're having to go over it in colors again. It makes the process that much longer. Now, I haven't had, to my knowledge, any questions that you want me to cover. Let's just a quick look. I have to be careful. I'm going to try and do as much of this on my phone as I can. In a previous lesson, I tried to look on my computer, which is just down here, to see if there were any questions by messing around, and I cut the feed. Pretty silly. So let me know if you can hear me okay. Let me know if you can see me okay. If everything's all right, then mistakes are made in my live streams. But there we go. 2 questions, two comments. Good day. I hear you. Yeah. Thank you, Marcia. Good to see you. Hello from England all the way to the USA. Right. Okay. So what do you think, guys, of this subject matter? We can use all of my techniques here. I've actually been looking for something to, you know, in the UK, in certain parts of the UK, you get these like dry stone walls, which I love. I absolutely love them. But they're relatively simple to do. So this picture is going to allow us to work on that. You may have seen in a few YouTube videos I've done it, but we're going to work on that. We've also got the plants over the top here. Let's go back to the palette. There we are on the palette. So we have decisions to make. I've sketched out, just did it freehand. You know, it's not going to be precise, doesn't need to be. This is just a demonstration more than anything else. But we do have decisions to make. Now, when I sketch out, I don't sketch all of these little details over the top of the brickwork, because I'm sketching out, and this is the same with all of my paintings, I'm sketching out for the block in, not for the final picture. This is just for the block in. So if you can see in your photograph, and you might be able to see here in the reference photograph on the screen, that we can still see a lot of the wall behind, sort of in the gaps here. We can still see a lot of that. So I'm bearing in mind, I'm going to need to block that in the wall color. So this guide that we can see here, my blocking of the wall is going to go up to here, and then we've got the plants. There's one more thing I'm going to change, and I'm not 100% sure whether it's going to work yet, but if we look through the picture here, through the door or through the gate, we can see the foliage here. There's another little bit of wall down there, but here we can see more wall. Now, what that does for me is it blocks your eye. As you're funneled into the painting, into the scene, you're kind of blocked off there. You can see the path probably goes round in this direction, but you're blocked. Your eye is blocked. Now, traditionally, I try to have my eye, or in my paintings, I want my eye to lead in a little bit more than this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put probably a little bit of distance in there, just some blue. So it's going to be some atmospheric trees sort of set further back, sort of in the distance, and then probably some blue sky. And I've sketched that in. So that's the line of the distant trees, and then we've got the sky. But in the top corner there, you can see a little bit of roof. And I just thought I might as well put a little bit of sky in there as well. Might tie it all together, maybe with some little areas through the greenery here. So that's what I'm going to be doing. Now, let me think. So we need to decide. Now I know I've sketched it out. I'm going to be looking at this painting in mid-tones. So if you look, for example, on the, actually, some of it's going to be mid-tones and some of it probably will be on the lighter side. In fact, what tends to happen with me is I'm looking for mid-tones and then I tend to paint it a little bit too light, more by accident than anything. But traditionally, that's how it works. But if you look at the wall here, for example, what we can see is there's yellows, there's oranges in there, there's greys, there's blues, there's all sorts of colors. And then, of course, we have the darker areas in between the stone here. Now, I'm not going to block it in that darker color. I'm not going to block it in the lightest color that we can see in there. I'm going to just get a general overall color. And you can get that by going a bit cross-eyed on your reference photograph, or making it blurry. So if you can get that out of focus and you can't see all the details, that's going to give you a much better chance of seeing the mid-tones, because you're seeing the average color rather than all the lights and the darks. So that's the color we're going to be using to block in. Now, I'm going to be blocking in acrylic, I think. I'm actually running a little bit low of acrylic, but benefit to this is if I get this blocked in quickly, I can actually start working on it straight away. If I blocked in oil, I'd have to leave it sometime. You've probably heard all this before. but we are going to be blocking in middle tone. So I'm going to go over to the palette shot and start adding some paints. The paint I always put on first of all on the palette because it's used for every painting, pretty much every painting that I've ever done, and that's titanium white. So just putting a little bit of titanium white down, bearing in mind, of course, that this does dry very quickly. What other color am I seeing in the reference photograph? Well, yes, we have white. I'm looking first of all at the wall. We have brown. I would say it has an overall brown look to it. So we can add brown to the palette. Now I must say I'm not going to be flicking backwards and forwards from the palette to the painting too much once I've put the colors on, because I forget to change back, and you all know what happens. Okay, I'm going to also add, looking in there, I would say it's not, if I added just white and brown, it would give us quite a cool color. What this is burnt umber, so burnt umber and white would give us a cool color. Now, which would be probably more like, almost more like this. So it'd be like a grey brown. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of orange as well. I'm just using up the remainder of just some odd paints that I had hanging around here. I'm also going to add, if I can find the right color, here we are, a little bit of yellow. Okay, now what we can do is get this entire wall. In fact, will it need any black? Maybe it will need a bit of black because the shadows, especially as we go up into the tree line. Is that black? Dioxazine purple. That wouldn't have worked well, would it? That's the problem when you're trying to use up some older paints. I mean, these are actually a very good quality of paint. They were sent to me by a company to test. Okay, so here we are. These are the colors that we're going to be using to begin with, and we're going to use, we may as well use, because it's generally speaking, it's a flatter area. I'm going to use, if I can find the correct brush. Let's have a look. Get my jar of brushes. Let me find the right one. It would have been better if I'd have prepared a bit better, wouldn't it, for this live stream? There we are. I've got a brush. Okay, right. So let's briefly go back to the palette before we then go to the painting. Okay, right. We have our water here, by the way. That, I think, is some old Gamsol or liquid or something. We don't need that because we're using water. Okay, now let's start mixing the right color. So I know that it's a white. I know we have white in there. I also know we have brown. So, and we also know that it needs to be considerably darker than that. But what I tend to do is I'll get it as near as I can. Now, obviously my palette is just off the screen down here. And then my reference photograph is to the left. Now, quite often I'll have that reference photograph there purely because I want it nearer to my palette. I've put it there because it works better for this video. We can see it better in this shot here. But anyway, so because of that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, and you've probably heard me say this before, I take the paint from the palette and I hold it up to the photograph to check to see if it's near. Now we're looking for it to be near, not exact. Okay, right. So as you can see, that's possibly a touch lighter. Certainly it's lighter if you go further up, but lower down, it's not far off. Let's just have a, that's the sort of color we're looking at. It's not a million miles out. So just gonna get a little bit of this color in. Now, one of the benefits, of course, with acrylic paints is it dries quick enough, and if we've got the colour a little bit wrong, that's no problem at all. We can adjust it. You know, there's a colour here that I probably could have had on, but I'm not worried about it. I was going to say blue, but I'm going to add a touch of black. That's going to pull down that concentration, because in this area here, we are starting to be a little less colourful. It has a bit more of a grey to it. Now we can do that by adding some black and white. That's giving us grey. Now, if you notice, as I'm blocking in, I'm trying to keep, you know, the sort of maybe a few vertical lines, but also some horizontal, mainly horizontal lines. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I should have done this before, really. I'm going to add a little bit of that dioxazine purple. Let's have a look, see if there's enough in the tube, which there is. That's good. Back to the painting. Getting good at this now, guys. I'm getting good. All right, so just adding a little bit of dioxazine to match these colours a bit better here. So it's kind of a little bit sort of richer in a way. Now, because of the paint, we're painting on a smooth panel. And because of that, you can see a little bit of the white through. This is absolutely fine. In fact, we want this. It's going to give us some more vibrancy. It's going to make the colours cleaner. Whereas if we were painting over a brown surface now, we'd probably have to give this a few coats in order to get the vibrancy. But hopefully you can see that the colour isn't perfect, and that's okay. It gives us a really good bed with which to improve and perfect any of these colours. So this is all good. Just now starting to darken a little bit. As you can see on the right hand side here, darkens a bit. I actually think probably in the photograph there's I keep calling it a doorway. I suppose it is a gate, it's outside, but that I think might be a little bit bigger in the reference photograph. So I'm just going to continue with that. What we are getting here is almost like that wall texture. And all of this blocking we're going to use, because the next coat is not going to completely cover this. We use each layer. We have the first sort of primed layer, which is the white. We use that. We have this blocking layer. You're going to see some of the blocking layer through the next, you know, the detail layer. You'll see it through. We're going to use that as well. Nothing really in this instance is going to be wasted. It's also, I'd say, quite important in a way to keep your paints as thin as you can, not going too thick, you know, especially if you're using a regular oil paint. The thinner you keep it, the less that can go wrong. I mean, there is this talk, isn't there, about fat over lean that is a concern to a lot of artists, and in some senses, especially with the style of work that I do, it's really shouldn't be that much of a concern. The reason being is because we use thin layers. So what happens with fat over lean? Do any of you know what fat over lean is? Well, if I'm using thicker paint, so I'm laying it on thicker, and by thicker I mean, in fact I should be painting while I do this because the paint's going to dry. So if I'm laying this on and it's, you know, it's got an impasto effect, imagine it's a if you work in metrics, imagine it's 1 millimeter thick or 2 millimeters thick, or imagine you're putting it on with a palette knife. whichever way you're doing it, you're putting it on quite dense. And then that dries. What happens is you get a skin on it. This is with regular oil paint, of course, not fast drying oil paint, but you'll get a skin on that that paint, and it will feel dry. But regular oil paint takes incredible amount of time to fully dry. The thicker it is, the longer it's going to take. But you still have that dry skin. It's touch dry. And then what we do is we then, or if we were to, add a thin coat over the top, a very thin coat of paint. That paint would dry very quickly, and it would sort of shrink slightly. And as that's shrinking, it then cracks the paint that's underneath it that hasn't got to that stage yet. It's not at that stage where it will slightly, shrink, and so it'll crack the paint. That's essentially the problem that we get. Now, if you're painting one thin layer of paint over another thin layer of paint, that's not going to happen. It won't happen. It's only when you're using very thick paint. So with this technique, it's not that big a problem. Where I suppose it could happen is if your paint is slightly thicker and then you go and paint something over the top, and you use a Gamsol or a liquid that dries it very quickly, then it's more likely to happen. But with thin layers, don't worry about it. I'm going to add a little bit of orange here as well. The reason I'm holding this is because it's sort of bouncing a bit. Quite often what I do is I'll put tape on the back to hold it against the panel. Let's just see if we've had any more questions. We do. Let's have a look. Yeah. Okay, so Lee is saying, hi Michael, my acrylic paint seems a bit weak and transparent. Am I using the wrong stuff? Should I invest in something with a high pigment? If you used a high quality paint, something that is a bit more expensive, generally speaking, it will have more pigment. I've probably actually got some paints here that I've been given. In fact, this brown is one of them, and it doesn't have the pigment. It's very difficult to really cover anything with it. It's just, yeah, it doesn't quite cut the mustard. It's sort of okay if you're doing a lighter block in, as I am here, but the better quality paint you have, the easier you're going to find it, because it's just going to cover your panel or your canvas better. I can't actually recommend enough the use of a good quality paint. And the same is true, Lee, of oil paints. The better the more you spend, the more pigment you tend to get, and that's really important. Now, I tend to alternate between paints like your Griffin, the Winsor & Newton Griffin paint, which is the alkyd paint. Has its benefits because it is a quick drying paint, dries that bit quicker, as it says on the tin, and you can basically paint quicker. The quality of the paint actually isn't as good as, say, something like, if I can find it, something like this, which is your artist's quality oil color. That, I mean, that's not a fast drying paint, but that would be a much better quality than the Griffin. But the Griffin is, it's good enough. But yeah, better quality you can afford. That's what you should try and go for. Thanks for the question. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, it's just me rambling on while I paint, which, don't get me wrong, I don't mind, but not as entertaining or as informative. Well, maybe more entertaining, but not as informative as asking questions. I'm just going to, oh God, no, I'm not going to do that. was just about to say, I'll check on the computer, see if anyone's leaving any messages on YouTube, but when I do that, everything goes wrong. Okay, so anyway, here we are. As you can see, we're starting to get this block in. We're already getting almost like a little bit of a stone effect there with this block in, but as we move down to the left-hand side, the colour changes slightly. I don't know whether you can see, but this side is slightly different from that side. This has a touch more, I would say it's more of a blue purple to it, only slightly, but we need to bear that in mind as we're painting. This the right hand edge, or to the left of the gate, this edge here is lighter. I would say that has more white. But if we move up into this part, we need to continue to darken. And although you can't see, because it's just off camera, I added so much black, I had to almost completely mix it. So there you go, as we're going into the sort of shaded areas underneath, I guess, what are they, roses? Yeah, could be roses, couldn't it? I'm constantly double checking that I'm on the right camera. Okay, so maybe a bit more up here as well. Also, another thing that's worth mentioning with regard to using better quality paints, if you need to thin them down, of course, because they have more pigment in than a poor quality paint, if you need to water it down or thin it down, it thins down better. You don't lose too much of the coverage because it's got, you know, a ton of pigment in it. So that's another thing that's worth bearing in mind. Okay, let's work down this lighter edge here. In fact, I'm even adding a little bit of water myself. And we can be quite, you know, quite rough in a way with this block in. There's no sort of real smooth elements in the whole painting. Adding a little more white. There we are, well, that's good. I mean, I know this is a slightly different painting. I thought it'd make a nice scene, but I think with regard to blocking in, you won't have seen me block in something quite like this. But, you know, my thoughts are the same, regardless of what I'm working on. I could be working on a landscape or, you know, whatever it is, you know, lots of distance and rivers and puddles and whatever, you name it. My thoughts are the same. My sketching diagram, my sketch is set up mainly for the block in, not for the finished picture. So I know where to put the paints for the block in. So I'm just adding now a little bit more purple, as you can see there. And yeah, so for example, if I was painting a line of trees, for example, I would still be looking at the mid-tone. You'll get more contrast in the actual reference photograph because you'll have the dark or the darker shadows to deal with in the trees, in that tree line. But I'm still looking for a mid-tone if I can. I don't want it to be the lightest, because what you do is you then add the darks and then add the lights. So if you've already got the lights there, if you've got the lightest color and it's blocked in, then you're going to add the darks and you're not going to be able to add the lights because they're already there. So they're not going to show up. So you need to be looking for that mid-tone. Once again, on the flip side, if you block it in too dark, you've then got one sort of almost flat dark area. It's going to be difficult then to add darks. I mean, you might say, well, you don't need to add darks because they're already there. Well, Where's the mid-tone then? You're going to have to add the mid-tone, and then you're going to have to add the highlights. So by adding the mid-tone first, it will make your life a lot easier. So here we are. This is slightly, I would say, slightly warmer than the photograph. This darker area here, slightly warmer than that. That's definitely got a sort of desaturated look to it. Also, one thing I will say is bear in mind that the camera does play tricks on the image. So if you're looking at an image through a camera lens, it changes it. I'm often surprised when I'm editing videos how I have to do a lot of color correction. Even when you've got, say, for example, the reference photograph next to the painting, that will look a totally different color to this, even though to my naked eye, it may look very close. When you're looking at it through a camera, as you are, it quite often can look wrong, doesn't look like the right color. But that's, yeah, that's some weird thing with the camera, with the lens. Not quite sure what that is. If you know, I'll be really pleased to hear. One of the things you do have to do when you're an artist is, you know, you have to learn a little bit, generally, or at least I have, a little bit about photography and what, you know, how to take a good photograph. It becomes very important when your career depends on it. I would never class myself as an expert, but yeah, you need to know a little bit about what's going on. Okay, so we are getting to a point where we are nearly finished with the wall. I'm just now, as we're moving further up the painting here, I'm darkening slightly by adding some more of the dioxazine. Probably darken a bit more. Yeah, maybe that. A bit more burnt umber. Touch more black. There we go. All right. Now, I think what I'm going to do is work on the inside here. I'm going to continue. This is the same brush. I'm going to continue. This is the Series 7 size 8. This is a great brush for doing any sort of blocking. I probably could have used a larger brush. I probably could have used something like that. Series 7, same series, just a larger version of it. But I wanted to get that. Can you see the individual little brush marks? And that was important. That's going to make our lives a little bit easier when we move over to the next stage. Okay, so as I always do, I haven't done it in this case, as I tend to do, I'm working now from the back to the front. So I'm going to add that sky. Now, one of the things I want, so I'll work out what camera, here we are. I want it to have a very much a Mediterranean sky. So nice and blue, but we don't have any blue on the palette. So let's go ahead and add that now. Let's see, we've got a cerulean blue. That's probably our best bet. And I would have thought with the white, with the cerulean blue, possibly a bit of dioxazine, we should have everything covered there. Okay, so just make sure brush is clean, of course. Give that a pretty good sloosh on the water. Okay, now before we move on, let's just see if we have any more questions. Okay, Marcia, sorry, I didn't mention the brush size, just done that now. Hope that's okay. Lee, don't think I ever see you varnish a finished product. Any reason why? I do actually varnish everything. I think I've done it once or twice in a YouTube video, but that's one of the reasons I wouldn't do it in a YouTube video, is because I like to leave the painting to dry for as long as possible before I varnish. You can have problems, especially if you're using a regular oil paint. If I use a Griffin paint, if I use an alkyd-based oil paint, you can, a week, maybe 2 weeks, I think you should be safe, especially if you're using thin coats like I do. You should be safe to varnish. 2 weeks probably would be better. Regular oil paint, ideally, if you're going to gloss varnish it, you want to wait 6 months. There are ways around it, but that tends to be why I don't varnish it, because the picture gets finished, it gets put to one side, and then that's where it will stay. Now, sometimes pictures sell, of course, before they've really had a chance to dry properly, and then you're going to want to varnish it. I don't like paintings going out unvarnished, but I'll use something like this. So this is a retouching varnish. Is that focusing? A retouching varnish by Winsor & Newton. Now this allows the paint to still breathe underneath, allows it to dry properly. If I used a regular oil varnish, it would be disaster, absolute disaster. So that's what we do. So this, it gives you, I would say, a silk. It's not a gloss varnish. All of my paintings generally are gloss varnished. It really pulls out the color. This is the next best thing. So if a painting sells quickly, I'll use that. That protects it, gives it a little bit of a sheen, which is really nice. But often that painting, it'd be beneficial a year, 2 years down the line for it to be revarnished. Not important, not 100% important, but that would be beneficial. So yeah, I don't varnish on camera too much, but if it's something you'd like to see, I can do that for you. Have a little bit of a sip of my vodka here, my water. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Where were we? Blue. We're going to do the sky. All right. Let's go to, I'm thinking it's that camera. Yes. Right. Okay. Okay. We have here our cerulean blue. There's not much sky, so I don't need to use too much of it. Now that's far too blue. I don't have any reference here, any reference photograph, of course, not that I need it for a little bit of sky. So I can't hold this up to anything, but I still think that might be too blue. Adding a bit more white and back to that one. There we go. Now, as I said before, if this doesn't look right, not a problem. We'll just paint straight over the top of it. But this will give us an idea. I'm trying to keep that smooth as well, by the way. I don't really want any ridges of paint. There we go. Bring that right down to that. You can even go over the, because it's acrylic, you can even go over the, the edges a little bit. Doesn't matter. I won't tell anyone. There we go. Okay, that is really quite blue, isn't it? Never mind. Now, area we were going to do just up here, painting rocking on the easel. You know what? As you go higher, as you go sort of look up in the sky, you'll notice that it is, the further up you look, the darker it is. So you can probably afford to add a little bit more of the cerulean blue. And now down here, I think actually I'd like to lighten that a little more. So I've just added a little more white. There we go. It just helps it to look real if you have that sort of, a graduated sort of color. Now we can still use that blue because I'm going to put in a little bit of a distant sort of hillside in there. My idea originally was, and maybe this, if you decide to paint this scene yourself, you can. I did toy with the idea of having the sea. This is actually supposed to be, when I was looking online, I was looking for a formal English garden, and I've looked at probably hundreds of photographs. But when I saw this, I thought, oh, that would look great if you could see the sea there. So it's more like a Mediterranean scene. But I decided not to do that. Anyway, what I'm going to do is now paint the tree line in there. So just go back to the palette for a bit. There we are. So we've got our cerulean blue and white. Now, it needs to be darker, of course, than the sky. Otherwise, it's just going to look like sky. So I can add the black. That's going to darken it. A little bit more black. Loads of atmosphere here. You can't see any real green. I'm going to add some dioxazine purple. Just hold that up to the photograph. Not the photograph, up to the painting. So there you can see. Now that should give us more depth in the painting, because now all of a sudden, where we had foreground and nothing else, now we've got obviously some sky, so we've added some interest there, but we've now got distance, although it's probably middle distance rather than far distance, because it might be a touch too dark. Anyway, who cares? All right, let's see how it looks. Could always change it. So as we start coming down, I'm actually going to add a little bit of color now. So you go over to that, I'm going to add some yellow, which is going to give us a touch more of a green look. So as we're coming nearer to the middle ground, adding a little amount of color. This is made up. If I was painting this and trying to be, you know, really, for it to look really hyper realistic, I would be using, even for a small amount of like that, I would be using a reference photograph. I would find some trees and sky that works, that fits, and I would use that for reference. But it's such a small bit. It's really more of a demonstration for us. So this is what you got. This is what you got. Okay, well, I'm just going to give that brush a clean, because now we need to work on some of the foliage that just sort of sits behind the door here. So I just cleaned the brush. Going to check on any questions while I'm here. No questions on YouTube either, so that's fine. Oh, here we are. Robert, can you get the same detail using canvas as with the Gessoed panels? Canvas is cheaper and available in more sizes. Yes, you can. You can get the same level of detail. I think when you're painting on a smooth surface, you can paint the same level of detail, but for some reason a smoother surface looks a little bit sharper. That's one thing I will say. It looks a little bit sharper. I know some people prefer painting on canvas, and to be honest, I don't know whether I prefer painting on canvas myself. It allows you, there are certain things you can do with canvas that you can't do with a panel. But I'm probably going to paint a little bit more on canvas this year, because I've probably been saying this for ages, but I've been having sort of working with a company to be able to provide my own canvas. So I've just been trying to get everything right, you know, the right tooth, the right type of linen and things like this. But that's probably not going to be available till the end of summer, autumn. So you will see me painting more on canvas. So, you know, I'll be able to show you more of those techniques. But no, I'd say apart from the fact that the panel is a little bit sharper when you're looking at it once it's finished, no, you can't really get the same level of detail. Okay, all right, onwards. Right, where were we? Foliage. Right, just need to pop over to this camera. Gosh, I should touch some wood here. I'm getting pretty good at changing the camera over. Okay, right, so looking at the photograph. Now, this is the case in point where we need to decide on what color we're going to do this, because we do have some darker gray. You know what? I might actually I'm going to bring that, before we work on that, I'm just going to bring this down a little bit more. So I'm still staying with that bluer colour, maybe a bit darker. Warming it up slightly. What happens is also another thing, probably should have mentioned, when you get the distance, if you are trying to graduate a colour from the distance, like I'm with this block into the foreground, you do get a gradual warming as well of that colour. So your green, in this case, well, we started with a blue, we're moving over to more of a green. It warms slightly. We gain contrast and it becomes a little bit warmer. So that's what happens as you come forward. Right now we're ready to add the lighter colour. So I'm looking now, if I look at the darker green in there, that's very much like a sap green, maybe a little bit darker, a little bit more opaque, but it's a dark green. And then we have this very light green here. I need to find a colour somewhere in between both of those. So what we can do is, for example, I've just put some black on there. I'm adding yellow, holding that back up to the photograph. That's not a million miles out. Possibly a little too dark. We can add a little more yellow. It's quite olivey now. Let's add a touch of cerulean blue. So that doesn't look anything like it, does it? It doesn't look anything like it at all. But that's the colour we need. That's our mid-tone. If it was slightly lighter, that would work as well. It can be a little bit lighter than this. You could add a touch of white to that. So it comes down to there. We then have some more wool. Let's put that wool in. It's a darker area of wool. So I'm having to now mix up a bit more paint. So it's kind of like that. It's very much a brown. There we go. And it comes right down to about there, and then we have a line of shadow. So while we are doing this, Lee has asked another question. Thank you, Lee. All questions appreciated. So he says, just going back to the cheaper acrylics, is that the reason they are drying so quickly on my glass palette, or is it the palette? I haven't actually noticed whether a cheaper. No, I don't think that it would. The drying rates would be that different. It won't be your glass palette. I just think, I mean, acrylic paints dry. Obviously, the biggest thing is the temperature. If it's warm, they're going to dry really quickly. I mean, that wall color that I did here, that's dry now, and it's dry on my palette as well. It's just acrylic paints dry really quickly. Now you can get, I don't use acrylic paints really often enough, as I say, I use them often for a block-in, but you can get a retarder, something that will slow the drying time down. But every time you add any sort of medium to a paint, you're losing any sort of concentration. You're diluting it, I suppose is the word. So I tend not to do it. I think just if your paint is drying, just add a little bit of water. Just keep adding water. So for example, let's look at this. So this here now, that's dry, that paint that I put on there, look, it's totally dry. And that was, how long ago was that? What's the time? So that was 30 minutes ago, 30, 40 minutes ago. That's totally dry. And this here, that's starting to dry. I only put that on literally just this bit, this bit here. That's starting to dry. What you can do, just a corner of paint, livens it back up again. Yes, it does thin it, but it will give you a little bit more sort of time to work on it. So as you can see, that's thinned it now. We can see more of the panel behind, but you know, these are the things that you have to do. So look, can you see that? It's just, you can see more of that panel. I can see more white in there. You can always add more color, but it will liven it up. I could even add water to this dry part here, and it will, to some degree, liven it up. Let's have a look. All right, so let's just give that a quick clean, get a bit of water on it. So there you go. I've managed to sort of bring it back to life, if you like. And I could add a bit more color to it and continue to use it. It's one of the benefits, of course, to acrylic paint. So, you know, you bring it back to life by adding a little bit of water. Obviously, that's really thinned down now, but actually thinning the paint down does have some benefits. And I'll show you that in a minute. Right. Good question, by the way. Good question. Right. So underneath this area, we have a little bit of a shadow. All I've done is, it's really quite dark. I've just added, once again, a little black. Okay, that's fine for that. I'm going to do the actual door itself now. So that's kind of like, it has sort of like a bluey purple, isn't it? I would say it's more purple than it is blue, actually. Let's add some white. I'm just going to add some white to this bit here. I'm going to add the dioxazine purple, right? Holding that up to the photograph. That's not a million miles out, slightly lighter, but not far, is it? Not far out. So I'm going to use that with a dash, just a dash of black in there. Now, as we did with the rocks, we were sort of going horizontal. I'm going to actually go down in a vertical, pretty much a vertical brush stroke here, because all of that texture, or the visual texture, it's smooth to touch, but it has a visual texture. We can use that, you know. So continuing with that color, I'm just mixing up a little more. And then as we actually move down to the lower part of that door, it's a little darker. And we have some light shining on the area of door there that's lighter again. So just continuing to darken ever so slightly. Probably a smaller brush would have been of benefit there, but you know what? That's okay. Just the block in. Okay, darkening still by adding a touch of black. Now, I've just added a small amount of water to that, just to pep it up a bit, just to liven it up. Maybe a touch more black. Being careful, of course, I don't want to go really super dark with it. Even with a flat object like the gate here, we still need to block in a mid-tone. There we go. So pretty much there. Working on this area here that is in the sun, all I'm going to do is just add, I think to begin with, just some white. Painting's just about to fall off the easel. There we go. Doesn't look much like sun at the moment, but it is. Okay. Just going to clean the brush. You're going to stay with the Series 7, size 8. But I have noticed, obviously, we have in the door here, you can see some of the distance and whatever's beyond it, really. So let's do some of that. I'm going to just add some darker paint to begin with, because the area down here is very much in the shade. It's also the back edge of the door that we haven't done, but there are a certain amount of details that really, you know, we don't need to worry about with the blocking. So we have a dark area there with some foliage. You can see some foliage through that, but it's such a small little bit, that'll be fine. Then we have our distance in that gap. So I'm going to add some blue and dioxazine purple again. Let's just give you a quick look. Blue, dioxazine purple. I'm going to add some white just to lighten that a little bit. Okay, back to that. So we have a little bit of this in here. Maybe go up a little bit higher. Okay, and then I'm going to add some sky color. So back to just the plain white and cerulean blue. Now I've just left a little bit of a little white line down the edge there, because I'm going to do the darker, you know, that's the sort of back of the door, you know, the, what would you call that? The edge of the door. Why not? We'll call it the edge. Okay. So I'm going to make that a darker color. It's actually richer if you look at the photograph as well. Let's just put a bit more brown on the palette. So yeah, this brown is one that I think has been sent to me, Daryl. It's a, you know, it's a sort of a lower mid-range, I would probably say, but it's actually very sort of very watery. Clearly has fillers or something in it, but it's not as strong. But you know what? It's all I've got to hand at the moment. So that's what I'm going to use. So you'll find now that, in fact, you know what? Stupid even using that brush. I need to use a smaller one. But it's going to be very watery unless I add something like the black, which is a very good quality black. So yeah, I've added a small amount of black, and look, it's now giving us decent coverage. Color's no good now, so we can actually adjust that, making that less black by adding some orange and just being, you know, as careful as we can. In fact, I'm going to add a little bit of white and some dioxazine. I just feel that probably it's a touch dark, and I am thinning it as well, just because that's going to allow me to just use the very tip of the brush just to get this edge of the door in. Door, gate, it's a gate. There Something to that effect. Just going to add, give that a clean, going to add a little bit more blue for the sky, a bit more white, a bit more cerulean blue, a little bit more. Okay, just up into this gap here. All right. We're getting there. I remember when I first started painting how boring I used to find blocking in. Still not the most interesting bit, but it's a necessary step. But yeah, it's I just find it so tedious to the point that I would always rush it. And I think actually, in some ways, it made me a better artist, because that next stage where you start to perfect your colors and add detail, I got better at doing that because the blocking was so poor. It just left me more to do. It's always better to block in properly, but yeah, it's not the most entertaining part of the painting, is it? But there you go. You know, we do what we do. Okay, right. So the inside of this wall, we just have an edge here between the wall and this wooden frame. That's actually, color-wise, it's similar to this, just slightly darker. So I need to try and mix up something not dissimilar, perhaps something, let's have a look. Yeah, that's not bad. Maybe just pulling down the warm color a little bit. There we go. It's actually difficult to really see the difference in the photograph. The colors are very much the same. In fact, it will probably be a little bit darker now, just near the top. I think it's these little things, you know, these little details with blocking in that I tend not to really enjoy. Just sort of kind of a bit, I don't know, a bit tedious. But when you get over this stage, it's where the fun happens. That's when it becomes much more interesting. Okay, we have the same issue on the other side, but I think the color is very similar to the bit we've just done. So going all the way down the inside here, up to that wooden frame. The wooden frame is a different color altogether, so that's going to separate things a little bit. There we go. So then the underside here is quite dark. I mean, that is actually the wooden frame now I look at it. Let's start working on the wooden frame on this side. So with our brown, I know I'm doing this off camera. Fear leads me to do that. Fear of not not changing the cameras back. Oh dear. Okay, so nice and dark down at the bottom there. Lightening as we move near to the top. But while we have this dark color, let's just do the area under here. Lovely, lovely, rich colour. So it's easier to, if you need to paint a sharper line, it's easier to use the edge of the brush because you've already got a straight edge at the top here. So that's why I'm contorting my wrist here to try and get that bit done properly. I'm going to move over just to a smaller brush just to do in the edges here, but I'm keeping the colour the same. And then we start to turn into much more of a nicer sort of a brown colour rather than that dark black there. Okay, so just going to check the old questions again. Okay, Marcia, is there a correct way to hold the brushes? No, whatever's comfortable. I think it depends on what you are painting. So the more detailed, for me at least, the more detailed the picture, the more accurate I need to be. The closer I hold it to the, to the sort of the actual paint bit itself, the actual hairs of the brush. If I'm being a bit rougher, then I'd hold it back. I'm not one of these artists. Let's see if we can find a brush. Holds their brush like this. I've seen a lot of very arty people do. They sort of lean back and yes, and as far away as they can. I've never fully understood that. I don't know. I don't think there is a really, there's a right way to hold it. Just whatever works for you. So, for example, as you saw me here, I was contorting my hand like that because I can get a finer line if let me see if I can show you. I need a piece of paper. Okay, use an old photograph. Right, so if I want to, we're in frame. So if I want to do a line, say for example, we have our pencil line top and bottom. Now, in this instance, it's easier for me to track that top line with the brush like this. Can you see? I'm getting a nice sharp edge. Now, if I wanted to do the bottom of it, it's much more difficult to get a nice sharp edge using the bottom of the brush. So if I was to do that, I would go from the top, as you saw me do, and use the point of the brush. That's going to be easier for you. Put that under there. Yeah, so I would say that you'll find ways, techniques that work better for you. I've never had a problem with, getting any achy joints or anything. I know some people can do if you're always holding a brush in the same way, but I actually don't think I always do. I think I tend to, just hold it however is most comfortable, however gives me the brush needs to be at a certain angle, for example, from the panel, or I need to, so I'll hold it just however. There is no right or wrong way, just whatever works for you. Okay, right. We still have some work to do here, so let's continue painting. Yep, we're on the right screen. That's all good. That's all good. So just continue down here. You know, these bits are sort of relatively tricky, actually. It will get easier again when we move over to doing the foliage at the top of the wall here, and then of course the area of ground there. Just going to adjust the color slightly. It's becoming more sort of door color, as you can see. It's becoming more of a grey. Now, I was saying to you earlier, and that's probably not the best time to actually show you. I'll show you when we move over to the foreground. I was just going to say there's a way to actually, you know, take advantage of thinning your paint down to the point that you do lose some of the strength of color, and I tend to do this technique, which I'll show you in a minute. Well, it's not really a technique, but I'll show you what I do in a minute. Things like grass. If I'm trying to block in a light area, I'll use more of the white primed panel or canvas or whatever you're using. I'll use that, so I'll let more of it shine or show through. So I will deliberately thin the paint, and actually it'll show you, or I'll be able to show you. That's one way of making, sort of really giving you a vibrant color that you would lose if you were adding a darker, you know, a darker tone. Right, I need to add a bit more paint to the palette. Do we dare go over to the palette? Let's do it. Let's live on the edge, you know. Right, a little bit more dioxazine. We need some more black. Let's see if I can. Gosh, that doesn't want to come out. What's happened there then? Oh, there we are. It comes out when you don't want it to. Right. Okay. So just want to add a little bit of dark just in this area here, just in that part of the painting. Right. So I'm just going to add a little amount of water. I'm going to add some touches of darker shadow. Just under the door. Okay, I'll probably go back to the bigger brush now. Right, so looking now to do the lighter bit first of all. So with some white. You know what? I didn't change back, did I? Didn't change the back to the painting. What a dope! It's doing so well. Okay, right. Let's continue that. I did a little bit of orange, not too much. That might be a bit too much. Touch of yellow, touch of white. Thin it down. There we are. So in this instance, there's a very thin amount of paint and color going on. I'm actually just adjusting the color of the white panel just by, it's almost like a glaze. We can do the same if I thin down. Gosh, I've done it again. Right, if I thin down that grey, so now just add a bit of dioxazine, but there we go. So it's very thin now, this. It's you can really see the panel through. Here we go. That area there is slightly darker, but that's fine for the blocking. Let's darken it slightly. Here we go. Right. So yeah, you're not, this has been thinned down to the point that you can just, it's almost like a glaze more than anything else. The sun is obviously coming from really high up in the sky here, because we've got shadows, but there's no shadows. Doesn't seem as though the wall is casting much of a shadow. It tends to be all in the the greenery above. Okay, moving off to the left. Okay. Right, so let's give that brush a quick clean. Off camera, I know, but you'll have to have faith. I am cleaning it and drying it. Right, so let's now work on this area here. So that, you've got really only two colors in there. You have, because it's so contrasting, you have just an off-white, and then you have the shadow, and it's as simple as that. If I look a bit closer to so I'm going to, once again, I'm still going to go for a mid-tone if I can, but it's going to be very much just washed out paint. In this instance, we are going to really try and use the color of the panel. So I'm going to go a little bit darker than that. All I'm doing is just adding some burnt umber. Maybe a touch also of dioxazine. There we are. That's pretty good. Pretty good. But yeah, it's washed out. It's you can really see the panel through it, and this wouldn't cover anything. If I was trying to cover over a darker color, there's no way I'd be able to do it with this, because it's just, even pencil marks, it's not going to cover over any pencil marks. But the beauty is it doesn't need to, because now we are at the color pretty much that I want. Not using much paint has that benefit as well. It's gonna, even if I was doing this with an oil, it'd be drying pretty quick because it's such a thin layer. In fact, I'd look at it, I think adding probably a touch of yellow might have been a good plan, but still, once again, this is the blocking. It's not vital at this point to have the colors quite the same. This is more of a cream rather than a yellowy sort of a sandstone, I guess, type of affair. And actually, it's almost now, this is what I was saying to you before, I tend to look for a middle tone, and then I don't, it comes out slightly lighter. Well, that's happened in this instance. So we may need to try and fix it, but actually I don't really need to at this point. But yeah, we can adjust this when we go to the next step. But there we are. That's that bit done. Now the only thing that's left, of course, is to do the greenery. I'm not going to block the flowers in. They'll come afterwards. Just going to block in the green. Now, looking at this, we have, once again, we do have the very light colors, excuse me, where the light is shining on it. But with most of it is this sort of mid-tone here. So that's roughly the color, maybe slightly darker. That's what I'm going to do. I don't know. Maybe I think the mid-tone is probably about this area here. So that's what we're going to do. So give the brush a clean. We're going to need a little bit more. What colors are we going to need? Just have a quick look at the palette. Dare I? Yes, why not? Okay, sap green. So this acrylic green, I've got an acrylic green here, which is actually, it's not permanent sap green, so it's a bit of an odd mixture. It's not the right color, but you know what? I quite often don't worry too much about it. I can make the right color with pretty much anything, almost anything. So anyway, I'm going to make this green now, and I'm just even going to mix it straight in here. Why not? Adding some yellow. I'm going to add some black. Black is going to pull down the color and it's going to warm it slightly. Now, if I go over to the reference photograph, look, you can see that's not far off. As we're painting on a smooth white surface, it's going to be lighter because you can see some of the white beneath. And if that's the case, you can go ahead and just darken it with a burnt umber or a black, as I've done in this case. A lot of artists, you know, they say, "Oh, don't use black. Never use black. Never use black in a painting." But maybe don't use neat black, but it's a great color to mix with other colors. Let's have a quick look while we're doing this. Let's see what else we got going on. See what other queries and questions you have. Let's just refresh the page. Okay. Is there a correct way to hold brush? Yeah, thank you, Marcy. I've answered that one. Thank you. I've seen artists online hold it close to the far end of the bristles, and I thought that looked very awkward. Yeah, me too. Me too. But you know what? As I said, there's no right or wrong way. If that works for you, then that's fine. This is such a fantastic demonstration. Thank you, Marcia. It has been 50 years since I've had someone talk oil paint, or I've had someone to talk oil painting about. I always wanted to know how to be placing colors and what brushes would create the correct textures. Thank you so very much. Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. As long as you're, you know, getting something from this, then I'm happy. I quite enjoy doing these live streams, actually. It's nice to meet some of you. I know we don't have too many people watching it live, and I realize that, you know, that might not ever change too much because of the time. I suppose probably a better time for you all would be if I had a live stream one evening. But the problem I have is with a young family, it's very difficult to sort of find time, you know, in outside of the working day. But we'll see. We'll see what we can do. We'll see what we can do in the future. I mean, I'm going to continue producing these videos. So if you can't ever make it live, then no problem. Throw me some questions on Patreon, and I'll bring them up in the videos, and then you can watch it recorded if need be. So they're always available. So now there's no real technique here, just scribbling it on. I'm going to add a little bit more yellow to the palette. So I'm just using here, what's that, cadmium yellow medium. To be honest, I'd probably use whatever I had to hand. If that was a lemon yellow, I'd just use a lemon yellow, maybe add a touch of brown to it to warm it up. But, you know, sometimes you just don't have the colors, and the same is true of me. I've just put in an order for some more paints. There's a bit of a shortage at the moment of pigments for these paints. So I know that a lot of companies are out of stock. I've been sort of in the process of, as well as having canvas made, having paints made as well, and trying to get the mixture right and everything. And it's you know, that alone is proving quite difficult. But now everyone's running out of pigments because of COVID mainly. It's There's a real spanner in the works, but yeah, I've just ordered some more paints. Acrylics, actually. I'm having to use some old colours. There we go. Come into a close. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is my block in. Doesn't look quite the same as the reference photograph. Doesn't have to. See, this is another thing, actually. I know of artists that are very particular about having, in fact, I think I've brought this up, but they're very particular about having the colours in their painting the same as the reference photograph. And then even more so, they are, and possibly this is a bit more important, but then when they have their paintings photographed and printed to turn into limited editions and whatnot, the colour has to be exactly the same as the painting. I don't think you can ever get it the same. It doesn't matter how good your printer is or the company that you use, it will never be the same. It will never be 100% the same. And for example, I printed this photograph off this morning, and it looks different once it's printed as it obviously did on my screen. And I okayed the colors on the screen through Photoshop. Yep, that's good. I'm happy with that color. Printed it out. It was different. It was a different color. I could have gone backwards and forwards trying to get it the same color as the screen, but every screen is different. So I've got that. I'm happy with this color, and I'm trying to match it as near as possible. Because I'm happy with it. But, don't be too particular about getting the colours correct at this stage. While we're talking, I'm going to just clean the brushes, because another disadvantage, of course, of using acrylics is if you leave your brush too long, well, paint dries on it and it ruins your brush. All I do is, and this is the same with when I'm using oils, I'll use the thinner. In this case, it's water because it's acrylics. I'll give it a really good clean. If the thinner is very dirty, I'll have a second thinner on the go. So I might have another jar of water in this case, and I'll give it a clean in the dirty jar, and then I'll move over to the clean jar and give it another clean. And once it has no more paint on it, when I'm wiping it, as long as there's no more paint on there, then as far as I'm concerned, that's clean. If I'm using oil paints, I'll have 2 jars of thinner, one clean, and the one that I've been using during the painting. Clean it in the one that I've been using throughout the painting, then clean it in the clean jar. That's the best way to clean it. And then never, if you can, never leave your brushes standing in the paint for too long. Some brushes are okay. The bigger the brush, the less it's going to affect it. But things like this Series 2 size 1, which is a very small brush anyway, leaving that standing in it will damage your brush. There's no doubt about it. So I just lay them down flat on my desk here. You know what, guys? Unless we've got any more questions. Okay. From Robert again. Thank you, Robert. When you choose the foliage mid-tone, do you decrease the color intensity? No, I don't. I try and keep the intensity, the saturation. Is that what you mean? I try and keep that the same. I don't decrease it. No, I look for. I mean, it may well look like I have in the photograph here, but from my eye, yeah, maybe it is. I haven't tried to. It might be slightly desaturated, but I try and keep the saturation levels the same. Trudy, hi Trudy. I've been painting for 20 years and I've learned so much from you. Thanks for sharing your talent. Thank you very much. Thank you for saying so. It's very kind of you. You're welcome, by the way. Marcia, are you going to have your grass brush made for sale? The one that you made in the YouTube video? Yeah, I have thought about that. I have thought about that. Yes, possibly in the future. To be honest, I'm not really sure why. I guess it's because it's not a brush I use very often. I think it would be very delicate as well in transportation. But yeah, possibly, quite possibly. Watch this space. I'll let you know. I'll let you know first on here on Patreon, or maybe in a newsletter, or maybe on YouTube, or Facebook, or Instagram. But I will let you know. Okay, so that's an hour and a half's worth of filming. Got it blocked in. I will continue with this, I think, for the next video or the next Patreon video. And we're going to get to some interesting and exciting bits with it. So I'm going to clear up now. So I hope you've all managed to, take some of that information, and you'll be able to improve your own painting with it. If not, then write to me with a complaint, or maybe don't. Okay, I'm going to go because I'm now talking like a fool and I need to go to the toilet. Okay, so I'll see you all again soon. Thank you for joining me in the studio today. Take care. Bye for now.